Hello everyone and welcome. In this video, we are going to understand predictive project methodology. It is also known as the traditional waterfall approach based on PMP principles. This methodology is one of the most widely used approaches in project management, especially for projects where requirements are clear, stable, and well defined from the beginning. Throughout the session, we'll explore how predictive projects are planned, executed, monitored, and controlled in a structured and disciplined way. By the end of this video, you'll clearly understand how the predictive model works, its life cycles, its strength, its limitation, and where it is best applied. So let's get started. What is the predictive project methodology? So predictive project methodology, commonly known as the waterfall approach, is a traditional and linear way of managing projects. In this model, the project moves step by step through predefined phases. One phase must be completed before the next phase begins. So the focus here is on detailed planning upfront. So the team, they spend significant amount of time defining the scope, schedule, budget, risk, and deliverables before execution starts. So this approach, it works best when requirements are stable, technology is understood, and the outcome is predicted. As shown on the right side of the slide, the project, it flows through 5 major phases: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closure. The key takeaway here is simple. Predictive methodology is about planning with certainty and delivering with control. Now, let us look at the predictive or waterfall life cycle in detail. Okay, the predictive life cycle follows a clear sequential flow. First comes initiation, where the project is defined and it is approved. Next comes the planning phase, which is one of the most important phases. So here, the project team, they create the detailed plan, which is related to the scope, schedule, cost, resources, quality, and risk. Then after the planning phase comes what? The execution phase. This is where the actual work is performed and deliverables are developed. So then comes the monitoring phase, where the performance is measured against the plan to ensure that the project, it stays in track. So finally comes the closure phase, where the deliverables, they are formally accepted, then contracts, they are closed, and lessons learned will be documented. So one important thing to remember is that the predictive projects, they move phase by phase. So each stage is planned, completed, reviewed, and approved before moving forward. Now let us understand the key characteristics of the predictive approach. So the first characteristic is that it is plan driven. So a lot of effort is invested in planning before the execution begins. Second, it follows a sequential flow. So the project, it progresses in a structured order without major overlap between the phases. Third one is that the scope is well defined from the start itself. The requirements, deliverables, success criteria, they are all clearly documented. Okay, another important characteristic is the heavy documentation. So every phase, it involves detailed records, then approvals, reports, and baselines. So finally, the predictive methodology, they focus more on control and predictability. So progress is measured against the approved baselines for scope, time, cost, and quality. So because of this structured nature, predictive projects, they provide clear direction, cost control, reliable schedules, and a stronger quality assurance. Now, we can see how the waterfall model works in practice. So as you can see here, the flow is linear and sequential. The output of one phase is the input for the next. For example, after initiation is approval, planning begins. Once the planning is finalized, execution starts. And during this execution, the team performs the planned work to create the deliverables. So monitoring and controlling also, it ensures that the project, it stays aligned with the approved plan. And then the closure happens. So another thing you have to understand is that changes here are managed through a formal change control process. So unlike the agile approaches, changes, they are not introduced freely during the execution. So this structured model, it makes the predictive methodology disciplined, organized, and also highly controlled. Now, we will go through the phases one by one. First is the planning phase. So the planning phase is often considered as the most critical phase in the predictive project management. Why? Because the quality of the planning directly affects the success of the execution. So the main goal of the planning is to answer important questions like what needs to be done, what are we doing, why are we doing it, who will do it, when will it be completed, and how much time or how much cost it will be. During this phase, the team will define things like project scope, schedule, cost estimates, resources, risk, and also the communication plans. So then some other important deliverables that happens during this period are the project management plan, the scope baseline, then the schedule baseline, cost baseline, the risk register, and communication plan. So we have to understand the better the planning, the lower the uncertainty during the execution. Next comes the execution phase. Execution is where the project plan becomes a reality. So this is the phase where the team performs the actual work to create the deliverables. So the main focus during execution is if you're following the approved plan, are we maintaining the quality, then using the resources effectively, and communicating with the stakeholders. Teams, they collaborate to ensure that deliverables meet the required standards and business expectation. Documentation is also very important during this execution. Project decisions, project progress updates, issues, and lessons learned, they must all be recorded properly. An effective execution phase will ensure that the project delivers the expected outcomes while staying aligned with the scope, schedule, cost, and quality. Next comes the monitoring and controlling phase. So, the project manager will compare the actual performance against the approved baselines here. So, they will monitor the scope, the schedule, the cost, the quality, and the risk. If there are any deviations identified, then corrective actions will be taken here. For example, if a project is delayed or additional resources may be assigned, then they will do certain adjustments over here. And if the cost increase, budget adjustments or approvals may be required. This phase is very important because it helps identify issues early and supports a data-driven decision making. So without a proper monitoring and control, projects can easily move away from their objectives. Now let's come to the change management in predictive projects. Change is inevitable in projects. However, in predictive projects, changes, they're handled through a formal and controlled process. So this process, it usually starts with a change request. So next, the impact of the change is analyzed. The team will evaluate how this change will affect the scope, time, cost, quality, resources, and risk. Then the Change Control Board, or CCB, will review the request and decide whether to approve or reject it. If it is approved, the relevant project baselines will be updated, the stakeholders will be informed, and the change is implemented and monitored. The disciplined approach, it will help to prevent any kind of uncontrolled scope creep and the project from any unexpected disruptions. Let's look at the benefits of the predictive approach. One of the major benefits of the predictive waterfall model is the structure. So the project will follow a clear roadmap from the start to finish. Another advantage is easier planning and management. Since requirements are defined early, it becomes easier to estimate the schedule, budget, and resources. Predictive methodology also provides a strong control. The formal reviews and sequential execution will help maintain quality and governance. Another key advantage is predictable outcomes. Because the requirements are stable, the project results are easier to forecast. Finally, the predictive projects are well documented. This will improve the transparency, compliance, and knowledge transfer. So this approach is especially useful in projects which are regulatory, compliance driven, or they have any kind of a stable requirement. Now let's come to the limitations and how to address them. Although predictive methodology has many strengths, it also has some limitations. So one of the challenge is inflexibility. So making changes later in the project, it can be difficult and also costly. So another limitation to understand is the late discovery of issues. Since testing and feedback, they often happen later, some problems may only become visible near the end. Predictive projects, they also require very clear communication from the beginning. If requirements are unclear or constantly changing, this approach may struggle. Compared to the Agile, predictive methodology has a longer feedback cycle and limited customer involvement during the execution. However, these limitations can be reduced by investing more time in the requirement gathering, then involving the stakeholders early, then using prototypes when needed, and applying strong change control process. So the key is selecting the right methodology for the right type of project. Now let's come to the key takeaways and final thoughts. So as we conclude, let's summarize the key takeaways from the predictive project methodology. So predictive methodology is built on planning, discipline, documentation, and control. So it works best in environments where requirements are stable and outcomes can be clearly defined upfront. Strong planning will lead to smoother execution. Strong monitoring will ensure quality and alignment. And effective change management will protect the project baselines. So while it may be considered a traditional approach, it remains highly effective for many industries and project types even today. So the success of the predictive projects will depend upon the clear requirement, the thorough planning, the effective communication, disciplined execution, and proper governance. So when they're applied correctly, the predictive methodology delivers clarity, confidence, and predictable results. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this session helped you clearly understand the predictive or waterfall project methodology based on the PMI principles. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe for more content on project management, leadership, digital transformation, and personal growth. See you in the next video. Bye.